Delighted to be here this morning to talk to you about the exciting relationship between VMware and AWS. My name is Tim Hearn and I run the public sector business in the UK. And I'm about to start to transition over to run the VMware Cloud on AWS business as well. I'm going to be ably and abetted by Paul, my friend and colleague Paul Bockelman from AWS.
Everybody, thank you.
Morning. So, we're going to break this presentation down into three pieces. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the observations that we've had of how IT has evolved in public sector in the UK and a little bit more generally. Then I'm going to talk about the VMware Cloud on AWS service specifically. And then I'll hand over to Paul, and Paul's going to cover some of the more deeper topics about how do you start deploying this service, whether you're starting from an on-prem position or whether you're starting from a cloud position. Okay, Paul?
Perfect.
Great, so let's make a start. So VMware Cloud on AWS. So let's talk about why we're seeing adoption generally, but I'm going to be talking specifically around public sector, and I'll try to bring in some public sector analogies and commonalities there as well. And whether you are a UK public sector person, civil servant, IT practitioner, IT leader, or whether you are a European IT leader. Got a few more people coming through as well. So whether you're UK or Europe, what you do find is cuts to budgets have impacted our ability to be able to deploy exciting and new and innovative IT solutions. And it's been a major problem for everybody across UK and in the EU that austerity has made drastic impacts to public sector budgets. And here's some examples from the UK over the last 10 years of how budgets overall have been cut, and obviously IT have had savage cuts as a result of some of these. So 40% cut in overall budgets in most areas. So for us to be able to deliver innovative IT and new IT solutions, transformation and refreshes, that costs money. So we have to find ways to be able to deliver that somehow. The interesting thing around this particular stat, and it's quite difficult to see on the slide here, but the lighter grey that you see on these slides are actually the cuts still to come. So although we've seen extensive cuts over the last 8 years, we've still got another 2 years of austerity cuts still to be able to manage. So the problem continues. So you as public sector IT professionals, leaders, have had to cope with these three, in fact there's four, competing issues within IT. Your budgets have been cut, but at the same time you'll be expected to deliver transformation, new innovation, new capabilities, and you're being driven by the citizens, civil servants and politicians to be able to up your game in IT and be able to deliver digital services. A difficult thing to be able to balance. At the same time, the demand is going up. So whether that's your internal customers, whether that's your citizens or politicians, or the public at large, everybody wants to be able to transact 24/7. We don't want to have to go to offices with bits of paper anymore. We want to have joined up solutions. We want to be able to go to one single place and be able to get everything we need. And we want to be able to do that from home on any device that we want to be able to manage. So again, being able to provide the capability of existing services in this environment is a big challenge. And the other challenge that we've got is resources, because to be able to deliver innovative IT capability when you're seeing savage budget cuts requires new skills and capabilities and smart people to be able to do that. And the ability to be able to attract and retain excellent staff within our organizations is pretty challenging as well. We've also got a large amount of IT professionals who need retraining to be able to cope with the new world of cloud. So again, a massive challenge of how do we bring the right resources to bear within our organization to be able to provide the right decisions of the strategy moving forward, and then the right operational capability to be able to deliver these services. And then on top of that, you have policy coming down, whether that's at an EU level or a national level, around digital services. Everything has to be digital now, whether that is a nice front end with a little bit of a clunkier back end system, But everything is around providing digital services as a primary mechanism to deliver public services. And in the UK specifically, although we're seeing this a lot more now around in the EU, a cloud-first strategy. So rather than build your own, you have to justify why you would not put this in the cloud first. And in the UK, we've had a fairly unique situation where a large amount of public services were outsourced to large managed service providers. And there's been a large policy drive to better bring those services in-house. So when you've had 10 to 15 years of outsourcing and you've got to bring that capability back in-house, think about that, how that impacts the situations with budgets, with demands, and with resources, and not an easy thing to be able to do. But what we have seen in public sector is a drive towards the cloud. So one of the answers to be able to handle this conundrum is to move to a cloud strategy and to be able to develop new applications in the cloud and push everything into public cloud. And AWS has been at the forefront of that, particularly in the UK public sector. But there's been a challenge with that, particularly over the last 3 years, and you see a change now in the strategy within certainly the large public sector departments. And I'm going to try and show this using this quadrant. So this is a quadrant from a book by Geoffrey Moore. He's the guy that wrote Crossing the Chasm. And he's written a new book now which is really focused on large enterprise and how does large enterprises innovate as opposed to startups, which is where Crossing the Chasm was focused. This is a great book, by the way, so there's some really nice things in here to be able to help thinking about organizational structure to be able to drive innovation. So it's a great book to look at. But if we look at this quadrant, the left-hand side is where the cloud-first activity has come. So native cloud, DevOps, developing for the cloud, all the work that AWS has been done. So on the left-hand side, you have the disruptive innovators that are developing in the cloud, developing using open source, creating really creative and innovative capabilities that can really transform public services. And the success of the work of these innovators in this incubation zone has been how they've been able to take those incubators and drive those up into the transformation zone on the left-hand side and take those through from a great idea in a lab to an operational service that can be scaled potentially at a national level. And a couple of examples of that would be gov.uk in the UK, the front-end digital service that all of us use to be able to access our services now, and also universal credit that DWP have rolled out in the UK. So lots of stuff here that's been cloud native. We'll start again and we'll build it for the cloud with little or no dependency, in theory, on the existing infrastructure. But then the right-hand side is the unfashionable piece. So these are the organisation that's existing IT operations that's got to keep the existing applications and existing services that all our citizens and civil servants depend on, need to keep that going. So you can't turn that off. And there is interdependencies between the two. So what we've seen is the less fashionable piece here on the production activity, taking existing apps and how do we hone and how do we optimize the existing services that we've got to be able to squeeze the most amount of productivity and value out of those. And then they've been pushing upwards as well into the operational area to be able to refresh and reimagining existing services. But what's tended to happen is this has been a bimodal approach, and in so many circumstances, the left-hand side has not been working with the right-hand side, and therefore you've had some duality of applications and services, and sometimes there are quite significant dependencies on the right-hand side to get success on the left-hand side. So think about where citizen data might currently sit, and you're pushing a digital service. There are some interdependencies between databases and information that might sit on the right-hand side in legacy applications and new services that you're trying to drive on the left-hand side. So what we've seen, particularly in the last year, is a move within some of the government departments away from a bimodal strategy where the two sides have been kind of kept separate. You've kind of had a steady state on the right-hand side and an innovation on the left-hand side, to much more of a situation where the two sides are now working much more together, and in doing that, you're bringing a hybrid approach. So a number of departments, DWP is a great example where their strategy now is much more around hybrid technology and bringing the existing operational side of the business, which historically was outsourced, into and working with the native and the cloud guys. And for us at VMware and our relationship with AWS, this is a perfect area now and a perfect partnership to be able to help to drive and help to be able to support a hybrid cloud strategy. So we're already finding great opportunities and great programs of work with public sector entities where they're trying to bring these two things together, where they may have a lot of on-prem capability that they want to be able to try and squeeze and drive innovation from, but they're already AWS customers doing native projects and digitization projects. But to be able to maximize the impact of the IT services, it's important to bring the two things together. And it's quite interesting when you're looking at that application transformation across existing legacy and new native innovation, it's quite easy to be able to make a decision around, okay, we're going to transform our apps in one particular way. But actually there are multiple ways, and we would argue, both of us, that all of the things that you're going to see here are relevant. So whether you are maintaining an application as it is, and you've just decided strategically we're just going to let that run until it dies, until it has no further use, or whether you re-platform an existing on-prem solution, which might be hyper-convergence, you might be driving more density in virtualization. Whether you have a multi-tier hybrid approach, which is something like your citizen data might be sitting on-prem, but your digital services that are leveraging that information might sit in the cloud. Or you take the decision that you're going to refactor, which means you're going to take that legacy application, you're going to re-engineer it, you're going to rewrite it to be able to move into AWS. Or you decide that you're going to write and you're going to develop a new application specifically for the cloud, and you write that specifically to be off-prem in the cloud, and it's born in the cloud, it stays in the cloud. Or you decide that you actually don't want to write your application at all, and you go and buy a SaaS service. Now, we would argue that it's actually important, particularly in the larger organizations, to look at all of these as potential solutions for your digital strategy and not focus just on one particular element of that. And that means that the relationship between VMware and AWS and VMware Cloud on AWS just becomes really important here, because you potentially can leverage the value in each of these areas. This is a nice pretty slide. I'll skip through this. But the important thing on here is when you look outside of the public sector in the general market and you look at Gartner and IDC and what everybody is saying, these sorts of statistics here are things that we're used to. We've been seeing this being published for quite some time. But it's interesting now that you're starting to see lots of statistics here on the right-hand side around the fact that most enterprise organizations are now focused on a hybrid cloud strategy rather than a cloud-only or a cloud-first strategy. So they're taking a much more pragmatic view about maximizing the interaction and the value between what you have on-prem and what you have in the cloud. So the difficulty is, it's all very well saying we're going to try and bring these two things together, but actually it's not a simple thing to be able to do. So if you're able to bring these two things together, there's a huge amount of value, huge amount of cost saving, huge amount of productivity and optimization that you can bring to bear. And if you think about the two areas, this is my experience. This is VMware world here on-prem, where there's a huge investment in on-prem, huge investment in VMware. There's been iterative development and work been going on to be able to optimize that environment. So you have an organization that are fully trained, that really knows how that environment works very well. They've got tools and scripts and capabilities to be able to optimize what is in there, and it's owned and operated by you as an organization. And whether that is in a sensitive part of your business or in a less sensitive part of the business from a security point of view, this is a huge part of the public sector world today. But clearly, in the cloud world, from a funding point of view, you want to try and move towards a much more operational model, much more of an OpEx model. You want to pay as you go. You don't want to have to invest millions of pounds or euros up front to be able to pay for something that will probably change over the next 12 months. There are unique services in the cloud that actually would be very difficult to create and build on-prem, which is kind of different from a VMware person saying that, but it's absolutely true that there are huge benefits around things like analytics and IoT that you would develop in a cloud world that you would never think would be sensible to go and develop in an on-prem environment. So in a public sector environment, there are very valid things to be able to maintain and optimize here. There are very valid things to be able to create and invent here. So if you can bring these two things together, it's important. But if you're going to do that, you need to be able to make sure that you can do these things. So you need to be able to make sure there's operational consistency because you're delivering citizen services that can't fall down. You have to be able to make sure that you've got the same SLAs in across both worlds, and you need to be able to use existing tool sets, whether that is on-prem knowledge or cloud knowledge, seamlessly. And you also need to be able to have the same SLAs across your on-prem and your cloud world, and you want to have it compatible with the new applications that you're developing in the cloud as well. So we're trying very, very hard to be able to bring these two things together, and that's where the partnership comes into play. So this relationship actually isn't that new. I know there's been lots of things in the press in recent times about the service, but in reality, this relationship has been 18 months, nearly 2 years old. And what VMware and AWS did was to be able to build a capability that was jointly engineered. So this isn't a relationship that started in marketing and then flowed its way down. This started as an engineering project where we've architected jointly an infrastructure that provides the best of both worlds. And it's taken us a while to get there. VMware have changed technology to be able to accommodate being able to build our solutions in AWS. AWS have made changes to their technology to be able to make this thing work as well. But the nice thing about that is you can leverage all of the VMware capabilities that you've had historically on-prem with all of the potential and capabilities that we have within AWS. And one thing to say, it's all very well talking about engineering and marketing, but the nice thing is that the two organizations, in my experience, I've been working with this partnership for 12 months now, is working brilliantly well. So it's actually quite difficult. We had a big event in Palo Alto a few months back, 100-odd people. It was very difficult to tell the difference between VMware and AWS people. We had to keep asking each other which company we work for. So it's a really good relationship from an engineering point of view, from an operational and organizational point of view, from an executive sponsorship point of view, and actually from a cultural point of view, it's a great fit too. So let's talk a little bit specifically about what this cloud service is. So in the cloud service, this is sitting in AWS's data centers. It sits on AWS's bare metal platform. And on top of that bare metal platform, you have a VMware software stack, which is identical to the software stack that you would see in an on-prem environment. So the great thing about this environment, whether you've got vSphere, this is virtualizing compute, if you're not familiar with VMware, virtualization of storage and virtualization of network and security. So you'll hear, if you're a VMware knowledgeable person around software-defined data centers, these three are the underlying components of a software-defined data center. vCenter is the management and automation capability on the top. But what you're able to do is to be able to use all the tools that you've currently got on-prem, vCenter, vRealize Suite, et cetera, to be able to manage and migrate and move workloads seamlessly between your on-prem environment and your cloud environment. And even better than that, it has connection through to native AWS services. So you can move workloads and infrastructure that you currently have on-prem into VMware Cloud on AWS, and then you can layer in S3 and other AWS services in on the top. So there's a connection between the two, and you're able then to be able to do either augmentation of additional services on the top of that VMware stack, or you can start to say, okay, there are elements of that VMware stack I want to try and migrate away and into native AWS. But it does mean that you can bring the two sides together so much more easily to be able to look at how you transform that overall environment. So this is a service that's sold, operated, and run by VMware. So this is our service, and it sits on AWS. We work hand in glove on projects together, so we sit down with our customers and architect and work how this might work for them. But it is primarily a service that's sold by VMware and VMware partners across Europe. So some of the benefits of this, irrespective of whether you come from an on-prem operational environment or you've come from a cloud-native environment, you get all of the services that you currently get with Software-Defined Data Center in VMware Cloud on AWS. There's a consistency and familiarity of technology, so you think about within public sector and the skills that you've got available, you can maximize the existing skills that you have and bring those existing VMware skills to, and also get them to understand a lot more about the cloud world as well. One of the important things about this service is we make it as easy for you to move those services off the platform as we do to move them on the platform. So you just need to think about this as an extension to your existing infrastructure. And you can drag and drop and move stuff between the on-prem and off-prem as often as it makes business sense to do so. But as I said before, it also means that you get direct access to AWS's services as well. So once you move those workloads, you can then determine whether, okay, I might want to remove an Oracle database and bring in an AWS database, for example. You can start to look at unplugging various components of that. And it also means that you can align it with both existing VM and container environments and make the most of both VMware worlds and container worlds. So there's some use cases here. We put up these standard use cases to be able to capture some discussions around these things. But the reality is that as we're talking to customers, both public sector and enterprise customers, you're giving us a lot more different use cases than we could ever think up. But these are kind of the three kind of categories we tend to kind of talk around. And so one of them is around maintain and expand. So you're an on-prem data center, you don't want to buy additional data center space because you may be hosting somewhere, or it may be on-prem, so you can expand an existing data center infrastructure, additional workloads actually into that. So whether that is for test and dev, whether that is for a spike, for tax, or students onboarding, you can do those sorts of things. And you can use it for DR and backup. You can use it for cloud migration. So we've got certain projects where customers are closing data centers. They're hyper-converging that infrastructure, but they want to be able to use the best of their on-prem and cloud environments. So they're saving money by closing data centers and moving into VMware Cloud on AWS. And it also allows you to be able to create a new set of applications by marrying the best of what you can get within an AWS environment and traditional applications. So just quickly, in terms of consuming this is VMware on demand now. So what you're able to do, rather than buying big upfront investments in VMware, which has been historically the case, you can now buy on demand. You can buy by the hour. Or you can buy 1 or 3 year credits. So this is specifically a VMware subscription service. You can buy using credits that you would have within an enterprise agreement or standalone, or you can buy on POs and credit cards. And also we provide some additional discounts for those customers that are retaining their on-prem environment. So you're not just getting a good deal and a subscription model in the cloud, but we're also cutting the costs of the residual infrastructure that you maintain on-prem. So where are we currently in the world with this service? So we opened the US data centers last year. We opened London in March. All these data centers were open on time to spec, and they're running fantastically well and growing very, very quickly. Frankfurt is coming very, very soon. And then we're opening 2 data centers in Asia-Pac. And then the intention is to come back and look at demand and look to open more data centers in Europe at the back end of the year. But the London expansion is going very well and expanding very rapidly. So far, the demand and the interest and enthusiasm for the use of the service has been fantastic. Finally, on On compliance, because I'm sure in the public sector this will generate a lot of activity. We're doing a lot of work in this area right now. We have to do our own compliance because we operate it separately to AWS. We're going through the 3 main ISO accreditations, working fast on GDPR because 25th of May is coming along very quickly. Working through PCI, and we're doing SOX as a Service Operations Center. So those are the building blocks then to be able to look at what we do at a national level. So there's a lot of work going on with the UK government, and we're just exploring what we do with both BSI in Germany and also ANSI in France. So with that, let me just hand over to Paul, and Paul will cover off how we now deploy and look to deploy these services.
Thanks, Tim. Appreciate it. All right, so let's talk about the technical details here. Everybody likes to know what's under the covers. At least I certainly do, that's for sure. So when we look at the stack that Tim talked about, we're taking the bare metal infrastructure that AWS is providing. Their traditional EC2 instances. The difference is it's running with VMware's hypervisor, not ours. So AWS is presenting bare metal instances. VMware is taking that stack and they're standing that stack up. As a result of this operation, this service, a couple key tenets to keep in mind is that this is an on-demand service. So as you have a requirement to expand, as if you need to bring your nodes, make your nodes larger or even make them a bit smaller, it is an on-demand service that you pay for the service as you're consuming it. So you're taking the AWS billing construct and model, if you would, and applying that to the VMware services. So from the hardware, also the stack, the operations, and the support. And as a result, because this is a managed cloud offering, you're going to have the latest version of the software. VMware is now, as a part of this relationship and this partnership, they've done a tremendous job of iterating very quickly with the code. Code releases are coming out in about every 90 days, which for folks that have been traditional VMware customers, that was a 6-month to a year before you would expect anything substantial to come out change-wise. It's about every 60 or about every 90 days. In fact, it was actually amusing. I just read an article where the latest version of ESX with 6.7 was released, and people were like, "Well, wait a minute, 6.5 just got released." We're like, "Yes, exactly. We're iterating quickly." And as a result, all of the other components that go into the stack to include the vCenter will be made and maintained current, ESX, NSX, so your overlay networks and the technologies that go with that, and the vCenter technology is always going to be kept current. What we're trying to do, and we really are working to maintain, is an environment where we don't have snowflakes. Everybody needs to, they're going to iterate and continue to grow with the software. What we don't want to do is have people that are being left behind. As the technology is being evolved, the customers are going to come along with it. Now, from an operations and a support perspective, that's being managed and maintained in a way where it's disruption is absolutely minimized to eliminated for the customer. So as part of the upgrades with the typical operating environment today, when you're talking to a data center operator and you say you need to upgrade your hypervisor, it's like, oh man, this is going to be painful. Well, that's not the case here. So when we look at the dynamic capacity, so DRS, from a resource scheduling, all of those types of capabilities are still available in the infrastructure stack. This capability is going to continue to evolve and start to take on the look and feel of the way that we operate things in AWS from a dynamic expansion and contraction type of approach for adding resources and removing resources. From a storage perspective, the NVMe flash storage that we have that underpins this infrastructure performs at a very high rate, very high performance characteristics. And then from a networking perspective, we have very strong capabilities on that front. So let's go down in a level deeper and look at the compute. So at a minimum, when a customer deploys this, it's a minimum of a 4-node cluster. And those 4 nodes are underpinned by bare metal instances that have 72 virtual cores, 512 gig of RAM, and approximately 15 terabytes of raw NVMe flash-based storage. What's usable, that gets down consumed with between the rating and the things that vSAN does, but ultimately you have, with the NVMe flash storage, very high-performing I/O capabilities on this cluster. And then from an AWS perspective, we've been, globally, we've rolled out 25 gigabit networking within the regions, and that is fully available to this service. From the hypervisor perspective, you're running ESX. You're not running a version of AWS's hypervisor. When you look at the shared responsibility model here, VMware owns it up through the hypervisor, which happens to be theirs. A couple key things to keep in mind is at this level, as an administrator, you're not going to have SSH or root access. This is a managed cloud offering, and so part of the SLA and the service offering that VMware is delivering to you as a customer is that they are managing the host, they're managing the hypervisor, and they're making sure that the health of those things are always in order, and that your cluster is always operational when you need it to be. From a storage perspective, vSAN is the technology that's being overlaid and used to operate, so the virtualization of the storage. If you'll notice from the previous component here, when I talked about the compute, we're using i3 instance family type, and if you, as AWS customers, when you look at that, you know that has on storage, the traditional ephemeral storage on board. That's the NVMe. Well, vSAN is actually managing all of the replication and copies of the data across all of the instances so that you are able to survive failures of instances. NSX is very interesting because what this allows us to do is this environment is actually running inside of a VPC, and I'll have an illustration of it next. But you have now an overlay network. You have an encapsulated overlay network that is running inside of NSX, which affords you the ability to take advantage of the traditional VMware capabilities, things like vMotion, the ability to use multicast, as an example. Those things are all enabled inside of this SDDC cluster. When you get into vSphere, the latest version of vSphere, along with vCenter, those capabilities are included as part of this offering, and you now have the ability to run in a linked mode. So from a vCenter perspective, the operational console that the customer is using on-prem, as long as you're in the right version parity, if you would, you can operate in a manner in which you can use your on-premise tooling to operate the components in the cloud and vice versa. And so a couple of key things to understand here. And this is very important. The account structure is very important. Tim mentioned that this is a VMware service. It's sold by VMware. It is managed and operated by VMware. The support comes from VMware. But there's other AWS accounts involved here. So in particular, it's important to note that when, as a customer, you subscribe to this service and you go through the VMware portal, you use the My VMware credentials, you make all of the financial arrangements to purchase the service, and then ultimately you get into the console to log in and begin to build a cluster. Well, what is happening behind the scenes there is every customer gets their own account. So we don't have any multi-tenancy issues here. So as a customer, when you subscribe to the service, there is a new AWS account created on your behalf by VMware. It's owned by VMware and operated by VMware on your behalf, and that account is not shared with any other customer. And as a result, the infrastructure that's deployed within it, that too is also single tenancy. Dedicated host, owned and operated by VMware. And as a result, as part of the subscription, any of the infrastructure costs associated with delivering the VMware Cloud on AWS solution to you as a customer, that all comes on a single bill from VMware. So the infrastructure, the software, the licensing associated with that, that's all bundled into the subscription rate, that single cost. And then any transit charges will be whatever the actuals are, those are passed through on that bill. And then the other account we're talking about here is the traditional AWS account that you may be using today. Nothing different about this account than any other account that you're using today. Now, the key thing here is that they both must exist. During the provisioning process, it is required that you have an AWS account to connect to the SDDC cluster. Now, Depending on the audience and the crowd, sometimes people are like, well, we're not AWS customers. Why do we want to have an AWS account? Well, a couple different things. But one of the primary drivers here is that at some point you may want to consume native AWS services, perhaps. The second thing is what you may not be an AWS customer today, but if you decide you want to start to use some of those services, you want to be able to do it with the least amount of friction as possible. Just point, click, start to use those. You don't want to have to go back and retroactively try to connect these things. And further, when you look at AWS customers, a vast majority of all of our customers have a substantial VMware presence on site, and so it only makes sense that the two exist and live together. So if we talk about how we're going to access this, a customer will access, I mentioned a portal. There's vmc.vmware.com, and this is where a customer can go in and make choices around the size of their cluster, so they can decide where they're going to launch a cluster, how large the cluster will be, and then they can also, once the cluster is launched, then make decisions about how it operates. So from an NSX perspective, for example, you will define networks within the SDDC or in the NSX overlay. North and southbound firewall, NATing, those types of rules. These are all things that you can do through this console. Now, that being said, VMware is also exposing a very rich set of APIs around operating these clusters. So if you're an organization that is very DevOps oriented and you have things are in pipelines and you're doing things through command lines, this capability is enabled. When you look at the console and the ability to go into vmc.vmware.com, this is really meant to be not a heavy lift for people to be able to adopt the technology. From the point at which you go into the console, make your decisions around setting up a cluster, launching the cluster. The initial first launch is approximately a 2-hour build. You can have a full VMware data center and SDDC in approximately 2 hours. From that point forward, the ability to add ESX nodes is in minutes. So if you need to expand your cluster by 25%, 50%, 100%, whatever it is, you're not waiting days, weeks, or months to do this. You're doing it in 10 minutes or less. And that's a pretty compelling capability for many customers that have the need to be able to flex their capacity. Now, from a traditional VMware administrator perspective that are used to using the vCenter tooling, that too will exist. The HTML5 based client is available. Every cluster gets their own instantiation of this tool. It will be operational, and your administrators have direct access to be able to make the changes in the environment. Now, a couple things to keep in mind. This is a managed service. So there are things that you're not going to be able to do that you would traditionally be able to do on an on-prem environment. Some of the higher level administrative functions have been abstracted away because it's a managed cloud offering. You don't want to have somebody who's subscribing to the service, as an example, down monkeying around in the hypervisor and breaking things. And so there's been a higher level abstraction that occurs, but once the cluster has been built out, there's a lot of capability that a customer has basically full design rights to do. And you can enable that through, and make the changes using vCenter, using the APIs and things of that nature. And so let's take a look at a couple of design patterns. People like pictures. I'm definitely a picture person. So when you launch the environment, one of the first things that will happen is the first account that I talked about is an AWS account in which a VPC is stood up and the SDDC cluster is launched. That VPC, as you see here on screen, is a traditional AWS VPC, has the EC2 launch instances, minimum of 4 nodes in the cluster, and then it has the technology stack that is built on that, beginning with the ESX hypervisor on up through the NSX controllers, vSAN virtualization, and then you have the vCenter. As we continue, and the environment is built out, I mentioned there was a requirement that you have to have a customer account. So that customer account is your account. You have full access and rights to do the things that you need to do with it. As part of the provisioning process, there is a set of questions that is asked. One one question is you'll define the CIDR range for your management network. So remember, you're sitting inside of a VPC. When you go through a normal VPC build as an AWS operator, you define your CIDR range. And then all of the normal considerations are there. You want to make sure you don't have overlapping IP ranges if you're going to be connecting layer 2 back to your data center. So you have the ability to be able to make those design decisions as part of the provisioning. Once that is stood up and the application stack and the resource pool is made available to you, there is an interconnection that occurs between the SDDC environment and your customer environment. And you can see that through our Elastic Network Interface interconnectivity. These ENI, there's a collection of ENIs, will be deployed with your permission and your approval as a customer into this account onto a subnet that you choose. That allows routing and connectivity between the overlay environment sitting on the left-hand side of the screen here within the SDDC environment, and then your native AWS. So you can connect your data center. Now, this line that I have connecting the data center to the IGW is a gross oversimplification. So just know that it's just really meant to represent that there are options for how you're going to connect your environment. And that story is continuing to evolve, and as it evolves, it becomes more and more robust. And then your customers, you can literally, as a VMware customer, if you're interested in only operating on the left-hand side of this architecture and having your customers interfacing with resources, we can drop multi-tier web-based application or whatever it may be, have those things live directly inside of the SDDC, and the customer and the internet source of their traffic all be managed on that side of the equation. Tim had mentioned, starting to overlay some of the native AWS services into this, and what we're finding is that customers are quickly starting to move and say, we want to do a hybrid, not only between on-prem and in the cloud, but we want to do it within the cloud. So starting to take advantage of things like Lambda, or perhaps using AWS Elastic Load Balancing services. Really basic services, very primitive services, but they start to provide a lot of high value in this environment because no longer is the administrator or the company required to actually have to manage those components within the SDDC cluster. They can just subscribe to a service, make a series of API calls, and be able to grow this stuff. Now, so if we were to take this and say, let's grow this environment out, and say we want to expand this, and again, this is just an example. Here we had 2 web-based applications, and one of them I wanted to horizontally scale. So I'm horizontally scaling the web front end, the business logic of the applications, maintaining that within the SDDC cluster. But I'm thinking, so okay, well, as I'm scaling the front end, I need to scale the back end. And so in this example, you may want to actually, maybe you're offloading your database. Use Aurora. So moving things from MySQL running inside of VMware, keeping those resources for your web front end, your business logic, it's a very high performing cluster, and moving it, offloading the database as an example here to something that is as a service. So then we continue here, you have connectivity that can occur from the internet, and say, okay, why don't we start taking advantage of some of the capabilities that we have within AWS to let's consolidate and aggregate access. Let's start to create capabilities that give us the level of security and to deploy layers of security, not only around your AWS VPC, but around the entire environment. You start to create an encapsulation around the entire environment. It significantly changes your security posture. And so the example here, as we continue to build out these web-based applications, you see that we have taking advantage of things like Route 53. We start to take the customers and we move them off of making access or gaining access to the environment through the IGW that's within the SDDC, and we move them over and we aggregate them through things like the CloudFront, using CloudFront POPs, adding things along the lines of if you were going to use WAF, if you wanted to use AWS Shield Advanced. These are all things that you can make a decision to actually use them directly with the VMware solution. Use those directly with that solution in conjunction with native AWS. You can do it through a native AWS integration. The point of the reason why I built this architecture out here, and in fact, this was something that started last year at VMworld, and believe it or not, I had about 3 more phases of things that continue to be built out on this screen. The ability to consume both the native AWS services and expand the capabilities of what you're using from the native VMware offering continues to grow. Earlier this year, we had an announcement where Greengrass is now an offering that you can run inside of the SDDC cluster. You can run it as an appliance. So you're basically getting Lambda-like capabilities deployed inside of VMware. And so as we have this integration, this very tight engineering integration between the two companies, we're finding more and more synergies in how traditional native AWS services can be moved into something like the VMware SDDC as an offering, but maintain a feel and operational capabilities similar to as if you were running it as a native service. This story gets more and more interesting. Every time I take these slides and I share these architectures with customers, it usually turns into, it starts out as, hey, let's talk about what this looks like, and then it ends up being a 2 to 3 hour whiteboard session saying, well, we've got this, and if we move these, what are our options? This is just a simple example. I mean, a lot of lines there, a lot of different pretty colors. I get it. It can look very daunting. But this actual architecture we deployed, myself and my colleagues on my team, we deployed this last year for VMworld and for reInvent. And frankly, these environments and this architecture took less than probably 2 hours to build the entire thing from scratch, once the cluster was up and running. And so you have a lot of agility in this architecture. And so moving forward, we have a ton of information. We're doing a lot of roadshows where both combined teams from both VMware and AWS, we're going out in different cities around the world, and we are engaging both at the customer level, the partner level, and we're continuing to educate. Look for that to happen coming in cities near you. It sounds just like a movie trailer, I guess. But right here, this information, these are great sources of information for what's coming up on the product. In fact, the second one there, the roadmap, this is the first time I've seen this. VMware has actually taken and they've published the roadmap, the active roadmap of services that are launched, services that are coming, services that are developed, and you can see that it becomes a very long list. Definitely, I would recommend that we keep up with the product and the interest, keep up on that keep current with the roadmap there, and you can also sign up to be notified as things are coming out. Now, one last thing that I'll finish with here is that Tim, when he had the slide that showed all of the AWS regions around the world, the region strategy is evolving, and what we're finding is that the first couple were crawl, walk, run, and then as we make a lap around the globe, I would look to see acceleration in the region launch schedule, because as we continue to go around the globe, demand continues to build, and as that demand continues to build, well, frankly, we need to be in all the other regions. And Pat Gelsinger has been very public about his desire to have VMware Cloud on AWS available in all AWS regions globally. Timing-wise, I'd love to say it would be tomorrow. I think that's a little aggressive, but it is coming, and it's coming very fast. Tim, any final thoughts?
That's better. We have a stand over in the exhibitor area. Come and talk to us over a cup of coffee. And Devon will supply jelly beans to keep the sugar going during the day. But we'd be very happy to talk to you and explore what you might want to use this for in the future. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody, for your time. I appreciate it.